Hello friends, this is my first video in the English language. Made lots of videos in Russian on this war and other things that happen. Today's the 21st of September. President Putin put out a notification about partial mobilization. First of all, a little disclaimer, I am very one-sided on these issues. My birth city is Lugansk, and I live in Russia proper. So Lugansk, sooner than later, is going to be returning to Russia. This is all Russian land, Novorossiya. I lived in the West quite a long time. I've been in different places in the West. So I do understand, especially Americans, I do understand their mentality, their thinking processes. So anyways, this video is going to be on the situation today and what's going on. Feel free to spread it, give it to other people, get the word out. First of all, it's the class of dispel several myths. Putin's war. This is not Putin's war. This is Russia's war. And the majority of the Russian people, the vast majority of the Russian people, 80% plus, vast majority of the Russian people, very much support this war and wanted this war a lot earlier. Why? Because 8 years of terrorist shelling by Ukraine, by the Nazi regime in Ukraine, backed fully by America, the UK, and the rest of the NATO contingent, murdering women, murdering children, murdering whomever the shells land on. People here were angry and they wanted this ended a long time ago. The government stood its ground, tried negotiations. The Minsk Accords, by the way, the only part of the Minsk Accords that Russia is a signature to is that it will bring the warring parties, that in this case Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics, to the table for negotiations. That is the only responsibility in the Minsk Accords for Russia, and that make sure that they fill out or that they carry out their agreed upon portions. Same thing as Germany and France were supposed to do with Ukraine. And the first thing Ukraine was supposed to do was become a federalized state. It's not a federalized state. It's a dictatorship where all opposition parties are banned. All media is either government or no longer exists. Opponents are, if they're not smart enough to run, they're disappeared. Some are killed, some are brought out as needed. So, that's Ukraine. That's the great democracy that America is neck deep in a pool of blood with. So, let's not beat around the bush about reality. So, every day the shelling's gone on for 8 years. It's gotten only more intense with the fighting. Primarily civilian districts. They're easier to kill than military. And the Ukrainian army is going after body count. It doesn't matter whose body count. Even in the areas like Khersonovskaya Oblast and Zaporozhskaya Oblast, which were not breakaway portions of Ukraine, but are basically Russian ethnicity. Ukraine lost those early on, and they keep claiming, oh, these are our citizens, but they shell their citizens. Again, indiscriminately shelling Kherson, which is the capital city, and the other towns and villages around the Kherson Oblast. Various Zaporozhye towns and villages are constantly being shelled by the Ukrainian army, supposedly killing their own citizens. Many of these places have no Russian units in them. They're just being shelled. Shits and giggles, people. Shits and giggles. This is the democracy that you, and your tax dollars, and your governments are going to support straight to World War III, which includes you fighting, because that's how and where this is all going. The next step, or the next move, is on NATO's part. What happened today? What happened in Kharkiv? Kharkiv Oblast. The units that were in those areas, and I know people who were in those units, were mostly police, National Guard, SWAT teams. They were covering that border with several strong points. So the Ukrainians took flying columns. If you're not military, you probably don't understand it, but you should read some history. Flying columns, so basically very fast-moving light units. In this case, on technicals, those would be pickup trucks with weapons mounted on them. So on technicals, American Humvees and whatever else. And they zoomed past the strong points and into the rear, causing a lot of havoc. They couldn't take any of the strong points. They tried several, but they were beaten off. So even though they may technically have surrounded these strong points, they couldn't get into any of them. For which case they started pulling in their armored reserve, which is hunkering down in Kharkiv, hunkering down behind civilians, knowing that Russia isn't going to blow up civilians, unlike Ukraine, unlike the West, which does it. Just look at pictures of Mosul after America liberated it. Liberated of every single building that was still standing and thousands of dead civilians. They were pulling them out half a year later, so pulling them out of the rubble. But that's okay. I'm off on a tangent. So they got in, they pulled in the heavy armored fist. At that point, the Russian reserves broke the encirclements, and got the troops out and retreated east. And retreated in very good order. Took up Moskoya River, took up a new fortified positions, and beat off all the Ukrainian attacks. Now, as Ukraine is advancing, it's taking a lot of casualties, because Russia dominates the air and Russia dominates the artillery battlefield. The artillery field is 20-1 in Russia's favors. Maybe theirs probably closer to 10-1, because Ukraine did bring a lot of its own artillery in that was lacking a lot of other theaters. So they managed to take about 2,000 square kilometers. How big is 2,000 square kilometers? 1.6% of the territory of Ukraine was basically lost. Now, on some sides, there was some panic in the Russian society as to why this was happening. I would like to believe that this was a feigned retreat and a well-planned one. And I believe this because, Ukraine's armored fist was a danger for any move on Kharkiv. And the move on Kharkiv had to come sooner or later. This is reserves, mostly with Western armor, that Ukraine had cobbled together around Kharkiv. Around and in Kharkiv. And as long as they stayed in the city, they were covered by human shields. Now that they've had to move to reinforce the breakthroughs on the flying columns and break down the strong points, they moved out of that air cover, or that cover of civilians. And they moved under the Russian artillery umbrella and the Russian anti-aircraft umbrella. So whatever limited aircraft capabilities and whatever limited drone aircraft capabilities that Ukraine has, its units are now fully under the Russian anti-aircraft umbrella. So they're not going to get any help. And they're inside the Russian artillery umbrella. So they've been getting treated massively. Thousands of dead, tens of thousands of wounded. Not as bad as Kherson, where Ukraine's lost somewhere up to 10 to 15,000 men killed and heavily wounded. So they're not coming back. Limbs blown off, backs broken, the heavily wounded. Invalids. And that's just, Kherson is a whole different case. Ukraine broke in, got itself a foothold, keeps popping troops into the foothold, and they keep getting turned into hamburger. Mountains of hamburger. And they keep pumping troops in, and the Russian artillery keeps working them over. They can't break out of their break-in zone because it's surrounded. It's basically a kill sack, a giant kill sack. And they are being killed. And their government, the Fuhrer, the cocaine Fuhrer, he keeps on pumping them. He keeps on getting his cocaine from Uncle Biden, and he keeps on pumping those troops in, because to him, that's just meat. He's making his money. He doesn't give a damn about how many Ukrainians left. By the way, starting 1st of October, I'm off on a tangent, but starting 1st of October, all women 16 to 60 years of age are no longer allowed to leave Ukraine, because they all get to go to the front and get turned into hamburger. That's right. Ukraine is drafting all women 16 to 60, and it doesn't matter if they're pregnant. Let that sink in. It's total extermination of a society. You got one guy left and 100 women, and you have a generation that may still appear. One guy can do it. If you got no women, you ain't got a generation coming up front. So they're going for total usage of Ukraine to the last Ukrainian. Quite literally to the last Ukrainian. As the U.S. government has said, they'll keep fighting it. Well, they won't keep fighting. The Ukrainians will keep fighting. And the Poles that are also fighting in there. Because from what my sources have told me, in many of those areas in Kharkiv in the north, they couldn't hear any Russian or Ukrainian speech. It was either Polish or it was English and German. in other languages. So lots and lots and lots of NATO mercs. And probably from the size of the contingencies of those mercs, we're probably talking about battalion size level, at least of Polish army that's now mercs. So the Poles are at least waist deep in this war, and they're taking casualties. So what's happening right now is a little bait and switch there. They got the units out. Russia has moved in two elements of two field armies, one tank army, one infantry army. Ukraine is basically in a big bulge in that area, and we know what happens to bulges, especially when the Ukrainian enemy is being attrited very heavily. Hundreds of dead every single day. Any groups bigger than 5-6 people are going to attract attention. For artillery, you're going to attract attention from a drone. And they've got a line of communications or a logistics line for you civilians that's now over 100 kilometers long, 66 miles for you, for our metric challenged audience. So I haven't said all that. In Russian society itself, all this was taken as shock. And then the West was building on that. Oh, Russians are shocked. Oh, Russians are dismayed. And so, no, this wasn't the point. Russians were dismayed that this was allowed to happen because we've been pussyfooting around for 6 months. It happened because 200,000 men in the Russian armed forces plus the militias in Donbass are fighting 7, 8, 900,000. Normal military doctrine, you need a 3-to-1 to go on an offensive against a prepared enemy. If it's a well-entrenched enemy, 5-to-1 odds. Russia is fighting at best 2-to-1. On many fields, 1-to-1. Yes, artillery advantage does help, of course. It does grind the enemy down. One of the reasons of slow advance. Kharkov, Ukraine was able to concentrate and was able to break through. So, to a point of one of my neighbor's kids was there in encirclement. So I got a pretty good idea what's happening in that area. Russian society was angry. Angry this was allowed to happen. Angry this was taken so long. Angry that, for example, 2 days ago, 13 civilians were killed at a bus stop in Donetsk, including 2 children, by an American missile from a HIMARS, which, thanks to the vice commander of military intelligence of Ukraine, we know that all targets are coordinated with American advisors. Basically, American NATO are the command staffs in Ukraine these days. So, war crimes, yeah, well, it's Biden. Uncle Biden likes his war crimes, nice and thick. Lots of dead kids and women and children. So Russian society is very angry. So what happened? 2 days ago came the order to do the referendums. Not just Lugansk and Donetsk, but Khersonovsk and Zaporozhye Oblast are doing referendums to A, declare independence from Ukraine with a following referendum, to B, ask to enter Russian Federation as new provinces of the Russian Federation. What this changes, because portions of Khersonovsk Oblast, portions of Zaporozhye Oblast, and about a third of Donetsk Oblast are in the hands of Ukraine. These are accepted in to Russia proper. This is no longer a special military operation to help Ukraine as it was once, get rid of the Nazis. Now this is a war. The foundation has changed to a declaration of war because this is Russian territory now occupied by Ukrainian forces. Okay, however you want, but that's the legal basis in this. Today was announcement of partial mobilization. It's going to be about 300,000 troops mobilized in this first wave. First wave is primarily for veterans with military experience. They're going to be mobilized in waves, followed on by people with military experience but no combat experience, and followed up by people with who are just signed as basic selective service, but who had never served. We're looking at about 300,000 as the first, and this is partial mobilization, very partial. If Russia was to mobilize all manpower, we'd have an army of standing army of about 40 million people. So and there's a ready reserve of 2 million people. So this is a very partial. Now, again, when I said 200,000 Russian troops plus LNR, DNR were fighting the Ukrainians, that's not 200,000 frontline troops. You're probably looking at about 30, 40,000 frontline troops, realistically speaking, out of those 200,000, maybe 50. The rest is, as what we called when I was in the service, ash and trash. That's the back end. That's your truck drivers, your military intelligence people, your people that wash clothes. You're talking about engineers, mechanics, everything included. So the combat troops are actually pretty low. So what now is going on is combat troops are being activated, reserves. So it's going to be a much bigger force structure coming into Ukraine, shaping that battlefield like the Ukrainians aren't ready for. Russia has enough military hardware. It may be not all first generation, of course. A lot of that is being stacked aside in case NATO goes full stupid, which I'm predicting they will. A lot of that is being set aside and prepared. But there are second generation, third generation equipment. It's still quite capable of taking out enemy armor, enemy equipment, and more than enough of it to fill up an army of 3, 4, 5 million. There was one interesting Ukrainian video came out. A guy showing the stamp date on a mortar round that was fired at them. Stamp date was 2 months old. That's right. Russia's not going to run out of ammunition because Russia's manufacturing enough ammunition every month to keep sending it over into the front. Plus 10 years worth of ammunition preparation for higher tech weapons, plus old Soviet reserves. There's mountains of this stuff everywhere. That's in depots. Ain't running out. So NATO's running out. Last I heard, 155 millimeter rounds saying there's less than 2 weeks worth for NATO as a whole. So I'm hoping NATO has a little sense, but I doubt it. Now NATO itself, it's going to be interesting to see who actually wants to fight and who doesn't want to fight. I think people like Scholz, weak politicians with weak wills, will more than happily go to war rather than face the backlash of their idiotic energy decisions, economic decisions, economic collapse of Germany, the demonstrations, the possible revolutions. We're breaking out in Germany, in Italy. They're already demonstrations. They're getting violent. Well, they're probably getting violent at this point because the government's just beating the crap out of everybody, all these governments. The Germans are just merciless to their own people, no matter how much they scream about their little democracy. Damn democracy. And the same with the Italians and others. Italy is about to go into elections in October, and it looks like the right will win. And in this case, the right that really hates the EU, doesn't want to be in NATO, and wants peace. So we'll see. So we'll see how it goes, and hopefully it'll stay peaceful. But I think people like Scholz would rather start a war, take all these people that are complaining and shove them into a uniform and onto the front, than face the consequences of his own economic decisions. But as far as most Russians, there is no mass panic. There are no demonstrations. There is some mass flight of our liberal fifth column elements. So yes, tickets are sold out for flights out of Russia. We're talking about 3-4% of the population that are liberal. Many of them already left. So have at them. Have more liberals, by all means. They're just the same as American liberals. Maybe even worse. There's the flights to Yerevan, Armenia, for example. And Armenia is about to be a battle zone with Azerbaijan and Turkey, so it's interesting that they're flying in those areas. But Yerevan flight tickets that cost yesterday, or the day before, 20,000 rubles, about $300, are now costing 500,000 rubles, so about $8,000. Well, might as well make some money off the liberals as they leave in packs. So the law, of course, has been changed. So very soon the law is going to go into effect. We've got the law had to be changed to criminalize certain actions, like raiding or pillaging for any military personnel is now up to 15 years in prison. If you desert or refuse to serve when you're given a service notice, and not because you're a conscientious objector, then you get up to 10 years in prison. Conscientious objectors can get up to 3 years in prison if they're ordered to serve. Now, conscientious objectors, like in the U.S., there are things they can do, like medics, that they can still serve without actually shooting someone. So that's a cop out when they don't want to serve. Surrender. If you surrender willingly, it's 3 to 10 years post-war, post-liberation. So once those things have changed, it's obvious, very obvious. Oh, and now for foreigners, if a foreigner wants to join the Russian army, 1-year contract, automatic citizenship at the end of the 1 year, and a big signing bonus, and the family gets several million rubles if the soldier dies. So foreigners are welcome now. That's being set up right now. So when all that news came out, it was obvious there's going to be a mobilization. We're taking this up to a much higher notch. What NATO does next is going to determine whether or not we have a world next summer or not, or what shape that world is. So it's all now in the hands of people like Schultz, Stoltenberg, Biden. Oh, God help us all. And these guys are idiots. Vain, dementia-riddled, some of them, like Biden, idiots. So we'll live and see. God bless.